The biting wind of the Montana plains whipped Eliza's thin shawl about her like an accusing spectre, each gust a fresh reminder of her father's chilling pronouncement, "A barren woman is a curse, Eliza. No man will take ye for a wife, not truly. Ye re a millstone, and I'll not carry ye longer." The words, spoken with the flat finality of a gavel, had sealed her fate. Now, her earthly possessions, a threadbare dress, the worn leather-bound Bible her mother had cherished, and a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird clutched tight in her trembling palm, were all that remained of a life already steeped in sorrow. Sold. The word echoed in the hollow chambers of her heart, a shameful brand seared upon her very soul. For in a world where a woman's worth was measured by the fruit of her womb, Eliza Mayhew had been found wanting, declared less than nothing by the man who should have protected her. Could a spirit so crushed, a life so devalued, ever hope to find a sliver of kindness, a moment of peace, in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, or was she to be forever a shadow, an echo of what might have been? "This here's the place, girl," her father's gruff voice, devoid of any paternal warmth, sliced through her bleak reverie. Before them stood a modest cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney like a fragile prayer against the bruised twilight sky. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and sorrow, his eyes holding a depth of quiet understanding that Eliza found unnervingly direct. This was Jedediah Stone, the rancher who had agreed to the transaction, a widower with 4 young children, his own life etched with loss. Eliza's father, Silas, shoved her forward. "She's yours, Stone. Strong back, if naught else. Don't expect chatter, she's a quiet 1 inch." He pocketed the coins Jedediah handed him without a flicker of remorse, his eyes already scanning the horizon, eager to be rid of his burden. Jedediah's gaze, however, lingered on Eliza. It was not the leering look she had feared, nor the dismissive glance of a master assessing new chattel. Instead, there was a profound weariness in his eyes, a shared geography of grief that resonated with the barren landscape of her own heart. He said, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. He gestured towards the cabin. "The children are inside. They'll be curious." Eliza could only nod, her throat constricted by a knot of fear and shame. The wooden bird pressed painfully into her palm, its smooth, cool surface the only anchor in a sea of terrifying uncertainty. As Silas Blackwood rode away, melting into the deepening shadows without a backward glance, Eliza felt a cold dread settle over her. She was alone, utterly and completely, in the hands of a stranger, her future as bleak and barren as the plains that stretched endlessly before her. What manner of life awaited her within those rough-hewn walls? Would it be another form of servitude, another daily reminder of her perceived worthlessness, or could there, against all odds, be something else? Jedediah Stone watched Silas Blackwood disappear, a knot of distaste tightening in his gut. He'd needed help, desperately, since Martha, his beloved wife, had been taken by the fever 2 winters past. The children were growing wild, the ranch demanded every ounce of his strength, and the loneliness, a constant, aching void. When he'd heard Blackwood was looking to place his daughter, the whispers had been cruel, barren, unwanted. But Jedediah had seen the flicker of desperation in the intermediary's eyes, and something in the description of a quiet, hard-working girl had struck a chord. Now, seeing Eliza, small and trembling, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored the hunted deer he sometimes saw on the edges of his land, he felt not a master's pride, but a profound ache of compassion. He turned to her, his movement slow, deliberate. "It's getting cold. Best come inside." He held the door open, the meager light from within spilling onto the packed earth. Eliza hesitated, her feet rooted to the spot. The scent of wood smoke and something vaguely like stew, unfamiliar yet not unpleasant, drifted towards her. Stepping over that threshold felt like stepping into another world, one she was wholly unprepared for. Inside, for pairs of eyes, ranging from solemn to openly curious, fixed upon her. Samuel, the eldest at 10, stood protectively in front of his younger siblings, his gaze wary. Martha, a girl of 8 with her mother's fiery red hair, peered around him, her expression unreadable. 6-year-old Caleb, a bundle of barely contained energy, bounced on the balls of his feet, while little Sarah, no more than 4, clung to Samuel's leg, her thumb firmly in her mouth. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Jedediah cleared his throat. "Children, this is Miss Eliza. She'll be helping us around the house." The word helping felt inadequate, a poor disguise for the truth of her situation, but it was the kindest he could manage. Eliza's gaze fell to the floor, the rough-hewn planks a welcome distraction from their scrutiny. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the unspoken questions. What was she to them? A replacement for their mother? A servant? A burden? The small wooden bird in her hand felt like a burning coal. She wanted to hide it, to hide herself. "There's stew on the hearth," Jedediah said, his voice gentle. "You must be hungry after your journey." Eliza wasn't sure she could swallow a thing, but she nodded numbly. The journey hadn't been long in miles, but it had traversed an eternity of despair. Later, after a mostly silent meal where the children whispered amongst themselves, their curious glances darting towards her, Jedediah showed her to a small alcove off the main room, barely large enough for a narrow cot and a small crate that served as a table. A worn quilt lay folded at the foot of the cot. "It ain't much," he said, his voice laced with an apology she hadn't expected. "But it's dry and warm." Eliza merely looked at him, her eyes still holding that haunted, faraway expression. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. He lingered for a moment, as if wanting to say more, but then simply nodded. "Get some rest." As she lay on the narrow cot, the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin settling around her, Caleb's soft snores, the rustle of straw mattresses, Jedediah's heavy tread as he banked the fire, Eliza clutched the wooden bird. It was a tangible link to a past where she had known, however briefly, a mother's love, a time before the word barren had become her only definition. Here, in this strange new place, surrounded by wary eyes and unspoken grief, could that definition ever change, or was she merely exchanging one cage for another, her worth still measured by what she could not provide? The days that followed were a blur of tentative adjustments and unspoken tensions. Eliza moved through the cabin like a ghost, her footsteps light, her voice seldom heard. She rose before dawn, rekindling the fire, setting water to boil, her movements efficient and practiced from years of thankless toil in her father's house. She cleaned, she mended, she cooked, tasks she performed with a quiet competence that did not go unnoticed by Jedediah. He watched her, not with suspicion, but with a growing sense of respect. She asked for nothing, expected nothing, yet gave her all to the running of the household. The children, however, remained distant, a tight knot of shared loyalty to their lost mother. Samuel, ever the little man, would often correct Eliza. "Mama used to do it this way," his tone challenging. Martha would simply stare, her green eyes filled with a silent reproach that cut Eliza deeper than any harsh word. Caleb, bless his restless spirit, was too busy exploring to pay her much mind, while little Sarah would sometimes offer a fleeting, shy smile before hiding behind Samuel again. Eliza understood. She was an intruder, a stark reminder of their loss. She never tried to replace their mother, she wouldn't have known how. Instead, she focused on her tasks, finding a strange solace in the rhythm of work. One blustery afternoon, as an early autumn chill seeped through the chinks in the cabin walls, little Sarah developed a cough, a dry, rasping sound that worried Jedediah. He was due to ride out to check on a distant fence line, a task that couldn't be postponed. He looked at Eliza, his brow furrowed with concern. "Keep an eye on her. There's some horehound candy in the jar. If her throat gets too sore." Eliza simply nodded, her gaze already on the child, who sat listlessly by the fire. As soon as Jedediah departed, the cabin felt different, the silence heavier. Sarah's cough worsened, and she began to whimper, her small face flushed. Samuel and Martha hovered, their usual bravado replaced by anxiety. Eliza remembered her own mother, a woman skilled in simple remedies, using a steam inhalation for coughs. Quietly, she heated water, adding a few sprigs of dried thyme she'd found hanging in the lean-to. She poured the steaming water into a bowl, then gently coaxed Sarah onto her lap, draping a towel over the child's head and the bowl. "Breathe deep, little one," she murmured, her voice softer than she intended. Sarah, surprisingly, didn't resist. She leaned into Eliza's embrace, inhaling the fragrant steam. After a while, her coughing eased, her breathing becoming less labored. Eliza rocked her gently, humming a wordless tune, the same tune her mother used to hum. Martha watched, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Even Samuel seemed less guarded. When Jedediah returned, his face etched with worry, he found Sarah asleep in Eliza's arms, breathing peacefully. The relief that washed over him was immense. He looked at Eliza, truly looked at her, and saw not just a helper, but a woman with a gentle strength, a quiet capacity for care that he hadn't fully appreciated. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He used her first name, a small shift, yet significant. Eliza felt a warmth spread through her chest, an unfamiliar sensation. Later that evening, as she sat by the fire, mending one of Caleb's torn shirts, she took out the small wooden bird. She ran her thumb over its smooth, worn surface. It had been her mother's, carved by a traveling peddler. Her mother had said it represented hope, the freedom of the spirit. For so long, Eliza had felt her own spirit caged, broken. But tonight, holding a sleeping child, easing her distress, she had felt a flicker, a tiny stirring of something other than despair. Could this be it? Could these small acts of service, of quiet care, begin to mend the pieces of her fractured worth? Or was she merely fooling herself, clinging to a fragile hope in a world that had already judged and condemned her? The Montana winter descended with a fierce, uncompromising brutality, transforming the landscape into a stark tableau of white and gray. Snow piled high against the cabin, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf, its mournful cry a constant reminder of their isolation. Inside, however, a fragile warmth was beginning to take root, nurtured by shared hardship and the quiet persistence of Eliza's gentle spirit. The incident with Sarah's cough had been a turning point. The children, while still grieving their mother, began to thaw towards Eliza. Martha, no longer openly hostile, would occasionally ask Eliza questions about her mending or her cooking, her curiosity tentative but genuine. Caleb, ever energetic, found an appreciative, if quiet, audience in Eliza for his endless stories of imagined adventures in the snowdrifts. Even Samuel, the most resistant, started to unbend, his corrections less frequent, his tone less challenging. He began to see that Eliza wasn't trying to usurp his mother's place, but rather was creating her own, through quiet acts of unwavering dedication. Jedediah, too, found himself increasingly drawn to Eliza's calm presence. He saw the way she managed the household with an efficiency that belied her small stature, the way she anticipated needs before they were voiced, the quiet patience she showed his children. He saw the deep sadness that still shadowed her eyes, but also a resilience, a stubborn refusal to be entirely extinguished. He began to share small details of his day with her, snippets about the ranch, the cattle, his worries about the harshness of the winter. She would listen, her hands busy with some task, her occasional nod or soft comment showing she understood. These small exchanges became lifelines in the vast, isolating silence of their winter world. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, trapping them indoors, the meager supply of lamp oil ran low, plunging the cabin into near darkness, save for the flickering light of the hearth. The children grew restless and a little fearful. Eliza, remembering a game her mother used to play, took out her precious wooden bird. Once, she began, her voice soft but clear in the dim light, there was a little bird, much like this one, who was afraid of the dark. The children, even Samuel, gathered closer, their faces illuminated by the firelight, their attention rapt. Eliza, surprised by her own courage, continued, weaving a simple tale of the bird finding its bravery by listening to the songs of the stars. It wasn't a grand story, but it was filled with a gentle hope that resonated in the shadowy cabin. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet, then Caleb piped up, "Tell another one, Eliza." "Please?" A rare smile touched Eliza's lips. She felt Jedediah's gaze on her, warm and appreciative. In that moment, surrounded by the trusting faces of the children, the howling wind outside seemed to recede, the darkness less oppressive. She felt a sense of belonging, fragile yet undeniably present. She had given them something, a small piece of herself, and they had accepted it. But life on the frontier was a relentless taskmaster, and just as a sliver of peace seemed within reach, a new trial emerged. A sickness, swift and vicious, began to spread through the sparse settlements. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at Jedediah. His first wife had been taken by such an illness. The thought of losing another loved one, or one of his precious children, was a torment he could barely endure. What if their isolated cabin was not isolated enough? What if this fragile peace they had begun to build was about to be shattered by a force far more cruel and indiscriminate than any human judgment? The dreaded sickness, a fever that burned like prairie fire and left its victims weak as newborn kittens, began its insidious creep closer to their homestead. Whispers carried on the wind from passing trappers spoke of entire families laid low, of fresh graves dug in frozen earth. Jedediah fortified their defenses, not with barricades of wood and stone, but with a fierce vigilance, limiting contact with the outside world to an absolute minimum. But the tendrils of fear were harder to keep at bay. Young Caleb was the first to succumb. One morning, he awoke with glassy eyes and skin that radiated an unnatural heat. Eliza, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs, recognized the signs immediately. A cold dread, sharper than any winter wind, pierced through her. Jedediah's face went pale, his usual stoicism crumbling to reveal the raw terror beneath. The memory of Martha, his first wife, consumed by a similar fever, haunted his every waking moment. "Not again," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on his son's flushed face. "Please, God, not again." But Eliza, though fear clawed at her, found a strange, steely resolve hardening within her. This was not the time for despair. This was a time for action. She remembered the remedies her mother had taught her, the herbs gathered from meadow and forest, the poultices and infusions that had eased so many childhood ailments. While Jedediah paced, wrestling with his demons, Eliza moved with quiet efficiency. She bathed Caleb's burning forehead with cool water, coaxed sips of willow bark tea between his parched lips, and sat by his side, her presence a calm anchor in the storm of their anxiety. Samuel and Martha watched, their young faces etched with a fear that mirrored their father's. Eliza spoke to them gently, reassuringly, assigning them small tasks to make them feel useful, to keep their minds from dwelling on the worst. Days blurred into a nightmarish cycle of fevered cries, anxious prayers, and tireless nursing. Eliza barely slept, her body aching with fatigue, but her spirit refused to yield. She saw the desperation in Jedediah's eyes, the way he looked at her, his hope, his fear, all resting on her slender shoulders. And in those moments, she found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. It wasn't just about saving Caleb, it was about saving this fragile family that had, against all odds, begun to feel like her own. One afternoon, as the fever raged at its peak, Preacher Thompson, a stern, self-righteous man from the nearby settlement, rode up to the cabin, his face a mask of grim disapproval. He had heard of the sickness and of the barren woman tending the sick child. "Jedediah Stone," he boomed, his voice carrying over the wind. "It is a judgment, I tell ye. A judgment for taking in a woman of questionable past, a woman cursed by God with barrenness. This sickness is a sign of his displeasure." Jedediah, his face gaunt from lack of sleep and worry, stepped out, his expression thunderous. "Get off my land, Thompson," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "This woman," he gestured towards the cabin where Eliza toiled, "is more Christian in her little finger than you are in your whole sanctimonious hide. She is fighting for my son's life, while you stand there spewing your venom." Thompson, taken aback by Jedediah's ferocity, sputtered, "But her barrenness, it is unnatural." A woman's purpose, Eliza, who had heard the commotion, appeared in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. Her eyes, usually downcast, met Thompson's unflinchingly. "My worth, preacher," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "is not determined by whether I can bear children, but by the compassion in my heart and the work of my hands. And right now, my hands are busy trying to save a life. If that is a curse, then I embrace it." Thompson, momentarily silenced by her quiet defiance and Jedediah's protective stance, could only glower before turning his horse and riding away, muttering about God's wrath. Jedediah turned to Eliza, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and profound admiration. He reached out, his calloused hand gently touching her arm. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything in that moment, standing together against the judgment of the outside world, their bond, forged in shared hardship and quiet understanding, solidified into something unbreakable. But Caleb still lay perilously ill. Had they truly banished the shadows, or was the greatest trial yet to come, testing not just their resilience, but the very limits of their newfound faith in each other? Days later, the crisis passed. Caleb's fever finally broke, leaving him weak but blessedly alive. The collective sigh of relief in the small cabin was palpable, a fragile dawn after a long, terrifying night. Eliza, exhausted but triumphant, watched as a semblance of color returned to the boy's cheeks. Jedediah sat by his son's cot, holding his small hand, his face a portrait of profound gratitude. He looked up at Eliza, his eyes conveying more than words ever could. The shared ordeal had stripped away the last vestiges of formality, the last shadows of doubt. They were no longer just a rancher and his hired help, they were partners, bound by a crucible of fear and hope. As spring breathed new life into the frozen land, a different kind of warmth blossomed within the cabin walls. The children, having witnessed Eliza's unwavering devotion to Caleb, now fully embraced her. Samuel sought her opinion on his whittling, Martha proudly showed her the wildflowers she'd gathered, and little Sarah was her constant shadow, her small hand often finding its way into Eliza's. Eliza, in turn, found joy in their innocent affection, a balm to wounds she had carried for so long. The label of barren, once a source of such profound shame, began to lose its sting. Her worth, she was discovering, was not tied to her womb, but to the love she could give and receive, to the lives she could touch and nurture. One sun-drenched afternoon, as Jedediah and Eliza worked side by side in the newly planted garden, a rider approached, not with the grim pronouncements of Preacher Thompson, but with urgent news. A wildfire, sparked by a lightning strike in the dry timber to the north, was raging out of control, heading straight for the small settlement and the outlying homesteads, including their own. Panic, swift and cold, gripped the community. Men shouted, women wept, and children clung to their parents, their eyes wide with terror. Jedediah, his face grim, immediately began preparations to defend their home, his mind racing. But it was Eliza who, amidst the chaos, remained a beacon of calm. She remembered the stories her mother told of fighting prairie fires, the desperate measures taken to save homes and lives. "We need to create a firebreak," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the rising panic. "And wet down the cabin roof, the barn, everything." Some of the men, initially dismissive, paused, struck by her conviction. Jedediah, trusting her instinct, immediately rallied them. "Listen to her. She knows what to do." Under Eliza's surprisingly knowledgeable direction, the community, including a chastened Preacher Thompson who had ridden back to offer help, worked with a desperate urgency. They plowed a wide strip of land, backburned brush, and formed bucket brigades from the creek. Eliza, her face smudged with soot, her dress torn, worked alongside the men, her energy seemingly inexhaustible. She organized the women and older children to douse the buildings, her calm instructions preventing chaos. As the fiery monster approached, its roar a terrifying symphony of destruction, its heat scorching their faces, Eliza noticed young Martha, separated from Jedediah in the confusion, frozen in fear near a patch of tall, dry grass directly in the fire's path. Without a second thought, Eliza raced towards her, shielding the girl with her own body as embers rained down. She scooped Martha into her arms and ran, her lungs burning, towards the relative safety of the newly wetted cabin, just as the flames licked at the spot where Martha had stood. The fire raged for hours, a terrifying battle between human resilience and nature's fury. But their desperate efforts, guided by Eliza's foresight and courage, held. The firebreak, though breached in places, diverted the main blaze, and the wetted buildings, miraculously, were spared. As dawn broke, revealing a blackened, smoking landscape, the exhausted but immensely grateful community gathered. Their homes were safe. Their families were safe. And it was Eliza, the woman once dismissed as worthless, who stood as a symbol of their salvation. Jedediah found her near the creek, washing soot from her face, her body trembling with delayed reaction. He gently took her hands, his own calloused and blistered. "Eliza," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us. You saved my daughter. You saved everything." Eliza looked up at him, her eyes, clear and luminous amidst the grime, reflecting the dawning light. "We saved each other, Jedediah," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, a silent acknowledgement of all they had overcome, of the love that had taken root in the most unlikely of soils. The community, witnessing this, no longer saw a barren outcast. They saw a hero, a woman of immense courage and quiet strength. Preacher Thompson, his face humbled, approached them. "Eliza." He stammered, I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Your worth, it shines brighter than any fire." Later that day, as a fragile peace settled over the land, Eliza sat on the porch with Jedediah, the children playing nearby, their laughter a sweet melody against the backdrop of the scarred but surviving landscape. Little Sarah climbed onto Eliza's lap, placing a slightly singed, but intact, wooden bird, one Eliza had carved for her, into her hand. Eliza looked at Jedediah, her heart full. The wooden bird her mother had given her, symbol of a hope once so fragile, now rested on the mantelpiece inside, a testament to a spirit not caged, but finally free. "I reckon," Jedediah said, his arm around her shoulders, his voice filled with a deep, abiding love, "this is home, Eliza." For all of us. Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder, a soft smile gracing her lips. She was no longer Eliza the barren, Eliza the worthless. She was Eliza, beloved, cherished, a mother in all the ways that truly mattered, her life a testament to the enduring truth that true worth is not measured by what we are told we lack, but by the boundless capacity of the human heart to love, to nurture, and to find belonging in the embrace of a true family.